I talk a lot about this with other parents who are estranged, that it's sort of, you feel like, God, if I can lose my own child, life is much more fragile than I imagined it would be. It's kind of the people who've been through, who've been raped or violently attacked or robbed at gunpoint or been through a war. And your brain sort of changes. You realize that life is much more fragile and delicate, and the things that you sort of take on as just sort of you assume are always going to be there can be taken away from you. Well, the main thing, which is sometimes the hardest for parents, is to write what I call a letter of amends, where they find the kernel, if not the bushel, of truth in their children's complaints about them. But to start up by saying something like, I know you wouldn't do this unless you felt like it was the healthiest thing for you to do. Now, from the parent's perspective, it doesn't feel like the healthiest thing for them to do. It feels like an incredibly hurtful thing for them to do.
I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition. Welcome to this episode of the Life in Transition podcast. I am super excited today to have with me Dr. Joshua Coleman. He's a psychologist in private practice in the San Francisco Bay Area and senior fellow with the Council of Contemporary Families. As a frequent guest on the Today Show and NPR, he has also been featured on Sesame Street 2020, Good Morning America, Dr. Phil, PBS, Maria Shriver's Sunday Paper, The New Yorker, Time Magazine, and numerous news programs across Fox, ABC, CNN, and NBC. Dr. Joshua Coleman, I'm really excited to have you here. Welcome to the Life in Transition podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
And one of the reasons I'm excited to have you here, before we jump in, it's something it's near and dear to my heart. And I was talking with the guy who connected us, Jack Stoltzfus, about this, and I'm from a very large family with cousins and parents that was raised in a religious cult, and there's a lot of a lot of stuff around that. And, I've been in and out of estrangement with my parents for a lot of my life. And I would say I have a pretty good relationship with them right now, but not a fake one, not a fake good one anymore.
Right. True.
This topic, and as of last Wednesday, I'm also an empty nester myself.
Congratulations.
So this, thank you. Yes. And that's, it's actually the Boomerang 24-year-old was the last one to be out right now.
Okay.
But also a big thing for him to overcome. He has reactive attachment disorder, was adopted from Siberia, and
oh wow, yeah,
a lot of stuff that comes with that. But he's doing it, and it's
good for him.
And it's really great. So this is for a lot of reasons. This topic is very exciting to me and very near and dear to my heart. So thank you, for being with us.
Glad to.
First question I have is, for you in your life, Josh, what would you consider to be one of the most meaningful, most impactful, maybe most difficult transitions that you have been through?
Yeah, well, the most meaningful and impactful and difficult, they're all the same, was, I was married and divorced in my 20s and have an adult daughter who I'm very close to. But there was a period of time in her early 20s where she cut off contact with me, in large part as an expression of when she wanted to talk about what she felt like growing up in a blended family, because I got remarried when she was 7 or so, had kids from that marriage, which is my current marriage of many years. But growing up feeling somewhat displaced, unimportant, somewhat neglected, that my son's got a much better quality of life and parenting and intact family than she did. And I think when she went to talk about it with me and wanted to initially, I was probably more defensive and angry and felt unappreciated and all of that.
Yeah.
And rather than really attending to her feelings, attended to mine instead. And was just, no surprise, alienated her further until she would just basically stop talking to me for several years. And obviously there were other things going on, as there often is in a young adult's life. But it was easily the most painful, traumatizing thing I've ever gone through or hope to go through again. At the time, there was really nothing written about it. And it wasn't, really until I talked about it with my the consultant in my practice. Therapists often have their own kind of independent consultants.
Right.
And I said, I'd like to talk to you about a particularly challenging case today. It's me. And she was like, okay. And she had great advice. She said, you need to stop defending and explaining and guilt tripping and just get in, just empathize and take responsibility. And there are a lot of things that she's complaining about that are legitimate that you're just not responding to. And really, once I started doing that, things began to turn. I mean, like most cases, it didn't just flip a switch per se, but it definitely began to open the door to to eventual healing, which is where we are today, blessedly. But as a result of that, I realized there was not, I was in therapy at the time with a kind of a famous psychoanalyst who had great advice for everything except this, because he'd never been through it. He didn't have a clue. It was
Right.
well-meaning, but like people who haven't been through it, they don't really know the territory. That's why I'm very involved in training other therapists through the American Psychological Association and other groups, because it really needs to be much more care about it. So I wrote my first book on the topic in 2007, When Parents Hurt. As a result of that, got a wide following of estranged parents here and in other countries. And as a result of that, started doing a webinar series, which I've been doing for some 15 years, a free Q&A that I do every other Monday. And then as a result of all that, did a survey through the University of Wisconsin Survey Center of 1,600 estranged parents, which I published in academic journals. And then on based off all that, wrote my most recent book, Rules of Estrangement, Why Adult Children Cut Ties and How to Heal the Conflict. So anyway, so it's been a meaningful transition because it showed me how fragile one's relationships with one's children can be. That you can sort of grow up, raise your children, assuming that you're correcting all the mistakes your parents made and giving your children, a good life and everything, and that this could never happen to me. And I'm a psychologist; I should know better, and it did. And so it was very sobering in that way, but it also gave me a deep feeling into the tissue of what it's like to be an estranged parent, but also what causes an adult child to want to make that decision, and why so many feel like this is the best thing for me, or this is in line with my mental health or my own identity, and the like. So it's by far and above the most painful, but also the most meaningful and important transition I've had in my life.
Yeah, there is so much inside there to unpack. I think the thing that I want to the question I want to start with is what was it that you learned? Looking back, this is quite some time now. Like, what is the thing that you learned about yourself from this very difficult transition that's obviously radically changed your whole life, actually?
Yeah, I think it was just my kind of impatience and my irritability and my defensiveness. And, I think in my marriage as well, I could be accused of having had irritable male syndrome, just not seeing the power of that. And, that being defensive, or to me, what might feel like a level 3 irritability, if you're a child or a spouse, can feel like an 8 or a 10 and can feel very, very hurtful. So I think learning that I can kind of come across much more strongly and more in a more hurtful way than I was really conscious of has been very useful and helpful. And it's not that I can always talk myself off that cliff, but I can do it a lot better than I used to be able to do. And certainly getting older, you sort of, maybe it's just the waning of testosterone. It's just
you mellow out a little bit.
Mellow out, exactly.
When you have those times when you notice, I mean, you said you're better at not, showing anger or hostility or grumpiness.
Right.
When you have those times where you do it, are you also quicker to make amends now?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And, I'm more likely to do it with my wife just because I have much more face-to-face contact with her. But,
right.
We've been married close to 37 years. And
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, when you've been married that long, you've been through everything. And we came close to breaking up many times in our younger years, and made it through that. And we're have been empty nesters for a long time, so there's much less to have conflict about. But yeah, certainly with her, if I blow it, and I still can, I am much more quick to amend. And she's fortunately for me a forgiving person. It'd be much harder for me if I was married to somebody who was just kind of like going to punish me for a week because of my, becoming more irritable or critical or negative or whatever. So
it makes a big difference.
I've heard a thing for that as well. Yeah.
I do a reflection process each morning, and part of it is, one glitch, something I did that out of anger or resentment or impulsivity the previous day and this morning. And then if there's amends that need to be made, then I make them, then. And I apologize to my wife this morning for being grumpy. I was fixing dinner and she had been running all day and I've been running all day and she needed to rest for a minute and do the red light therapy on her back. And I was just, she's like, I want to talk. And I'm like, well, I can't look at you while I'm trying to fix dinner because I have time scheduled, blah, blah, blah. And I was just grumpy and pissy, and I apologized. And she said, yeah, I appreciate the apology, but I know, like your wife, she's very forgiving. She's like, hey, I know, and it's okay. But it's so important to make those amends. And when I think about my relationship with my kids, like the rockiness that it went through in their teenage years.
Yeah.
The thing that I did differently than my parents is I recognized that I made mistakes.
Well, right. Yeah.
And then I would make amends. And sometimes it was very tough. Right. And I had a conversation with my parents about a year ago. I went to see them in April. And I said, that's really the main difference. I'm not saying my mistakes are bigger or worse or less than your mistakes, but I know I've made mistakes and I've been trying to correct those.
Right. Yeah.
And whereas I feel like a lot of my parents still don't recognize, and they can't. Their identity is so strong in it. And I had the gift of doing. Are you familiar with the Hoffman Institute, the Hoffman process?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had the gift of doing that. I've done a lot of work along the years, but I had the gift of doing that last June. And I think that, unlike what it talks about in your book, and so much of the literature around estrangement is about either somebody's the victim and somebody else is the perpetrator.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is not the reality. Life is not like that.
Yeah, it's the wrong lens to look at it through. Yeah.
Yeah. But Hoffman is such a beautiful way of, of going through that where did you learn this personality? Where did you learn this behavior from? To be clear. But then immediately, where did they learn it from?
Right. Exactly.
Which brings compassion back into it immediately instead of blame, because blame just simply doesn't help. Right?
Just putting out more hurt into the world, and it doesn't really liberate you if you're kind of you just sort of carry the blame into the rest of your life, and you're not really being liberated from the things that you're feeling kind of victimized by. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, good on you for seeing what you could do differently and how to make that and how to rebuild. If you were to look back now, Josh, on that time when you were going through the building of the estrangement with your daughter, what would you tell your younger self today? Like, what advice would you want to give Josh minus whatever it's been, 10 or 15 years?
Yeah, well, probably, let's see, probably more like 20, but.
Okay. You got a couple years on me then.
What would it be? It would just be to shut up and listen more and show more interest and curiosity, and don't be so defensive and don't need to be right. And be more in a position of advocacy for what your kid is telling you. I think that would be the biggest thing I would tell myself.
Right. So, the big ones there is listen, empathy as a whole, right? And I love the word curiosity. I love, that's my favorite line in all of TV probably is from Ted Lasso, right? If you'd been a little bit more curious and a little bit less critical, then you wouldn't have lost this bet.
There we go. Yeah.
But I think, so that's, I think that's great advice. And it's, for me, it's hard to, there's a certain basis of enoughness in me that I need to experience so that I can be not defensive,
right?
So that I can be empathetic, so that I can listen, right? If I'm on my back foot because I feel like I'm not enough, and I'm not doing what I need to do for my kids, it's really hard for me to be there with them.
Absolutely. Nothing kind of attacks us more at the core than feeling like we've let our children down or hurt them or betrayed them in some way. Those are in some ways the hardest things to face. And I think there's so many estrangements happen today because generations, Gen X, boomers, haven't really been socialized enough to be able to communicate in the way that their younger generations are wanting them to. They're wanting to review their childhoods. They're wanting to talk about the things that impacted them. And, older parents are like, you want to see a bad childhood? I had a bad childhood. You're taking a walk in the park, compared to what I had. I'll show you a bad childhood.
Right.
It doesn't exactly make their now adult children, feel very understood or empathized with. And it's so important to be able to do that and to see that if the adult child's raising complaints with you, that they're doing it in the spirit typically of either wanting a better relationship with you or wanting to understand something more deeply about themselves and your contributions to it. And they may not even be right, but having that conversation and that curiosity is really key.
Yeah, no, it was a huge turning point for me where I could interview my parents about their life from a place of curiosity and not being critical. This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Midlife Transition Mastery. If you have reached midlife and you are successful, you have checked all the boxes, you've done everything you thought you should do, and especially pleasing everybody else, doing what you think everyone else needs you to do, but you still feel like something's missing, like you're coming up empty, feeling alone, feeling misguided or lost. Midlife Transition Mastery Explorer community is for you. Here we will build authentic community. We will learn about the 8 steps to mastering midlife transition. And we will learn and execute living life with no regrets in our second half. Please check out the community on lifeintransition.online/MLTM, Midlife Transition Mastery. And I look forward to seeing you around the fire in this community. And there's a lot to that, but it was very interesting, and I learned a lot, and I had a lot, and I developed a lot more compassion, even if I still didn't agree, even if there's still some things that were really wrong. Yeah, it really developed a lot more compassion.
I can imagine. Yeah,
and I had this epiphany. Have you read Anatomy of Peace? Are you familiar with the Arbinger Institute?
No. I'm not.
Okay. So there's one, it's very, very interesting. It talks about the root cause. It's a group of professors from both sides of the Atlantic that study the root cause of violence. Oh. Like what creates one human being able to do violence to another.
Yeah.
And that's Anatomy of Peace is one of the outcomes of that. But one of the professors just wrote another book called Bonds That Make Us Free before the Arbinger Institute. So it's under his own name. And I read that book by accident, by a God moment at a monastery in New Mexico in 2019. Wow. I'd meant to grab the message, Eugene Patterson's version of the Bible, on the way out because I knew I was going to a silent retreat the first time in my life. I was super stressed.
Yeah, I bet.
And that book was the same size and shape and cover. Oh, so I ended up with that one. And that was the only thing I had to read, and I wasn't doing anything else.
Wow.
In that book, I had this epiphany because it was somebody else sharing their story in that book that I was arranging my kids as accessories to my life. Mm-hmm. All right. Not bad. I was checking the boxes, right? I was doing everything. I was reading to them. I was loving them, hugging them, telling them I loved them, paying for the bills, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But it was not coming from a place of curiosity and supporting them as equal human being to myself. It was that I was building this life for Art Blanchford that included 3 kids, but it wasn't, and it was a complete mind shift. I mean, it was a horrible, heart-wrenching realization for me, but that was a tipping point in my relationship with my children that were at the time, let's say, mid-teenagers, one older teenager, one younger teenager, one right in the middle.
Yeah.
But it completely changed the way that I looked at it because all of a sudden I'm interested in their life, not how they're going to reflect in mine or how they're going to fit in mine. And that's what the Anatomy of Peace talks about, that the root cause to all violence is when we see somebody else not as a human being.
Well, that's for sure.
And that seeing somebody as a human being, meaning that we see their needs, desires, and wants as equally as important to our own. Right. Fears, dreams, all of it is just as important to our own. And I know a lot of parents, it's like we see ourselves a little bit higher, right? And our kids a little bit lower. And to make that shift and to see them as their own selves so that, my older son, when he's dropping a bunch of F-bombs at 12 years old around a bunch of other kids, my first response that time when it happened the first time was, how are the kids' parents going to think about me?
Sure.
And now it changed to, wow, my son's dysregulated. What does he need right now to get back into regulation? Yeah. It's a completely different, it's subtle. It doesn't look anything different on the video camera. But the heart space is completely different because I'm seeing him now as a human being and not as a vehicle to help my life be a certain way.
Right. Well, I think you're kind of highlighting the change historically from, this a more psychological orientation, both towards the self, but also towards parenting. I don't know if you've read Philip Reif's sociologist's work, but he talked about, earlier 20th century, there was economic man. And then over the course of the kind of late 20th century, it evolved into psychological man. And so now we're just much more thinking about thoughts and feelings, et cetera, and our identities, much less towards helping our children, particularly in the middle classes, but it's also changing it's much more towards helping our children become a self, develop a voice, become assertive, know what they want, and go after it. And that's all kind of historically new. And so the task of the parent has become more challenging, and also the kind of stick that the adult child can hit the parent over the head with has also become bigger and harder, because they can say, all you cared about was me fitting in and, becoming kind of just a member of society, and you didn't really help me with my own voice and, my talents and the like. It's what I call soulmate parenting. So the task of parenting has become much more challenging, which is good. I agree with you that is a better way to parent, but it's easy to see why so many parents miss that mark, because it is a bigger way. It's in some ways more challenging. You have to have a lot more on board psychologically to go there, right?
Yeah, and it's not the way their parents were.
Not at all.
Because as you said, this didn't come in. Before, if you didn't beat your kids and they had enough to eat, you're good. You're good. You're good A.
That's right.
Right.
Yep.
And now it's not that we don't need to change this a different way, because then it's not that we're beating our kids, but they're killing themselves.
Right. Exactly.
Right. At higher rates than ever before, especially teenage girls.
Yeah.
Right.
That's true.
So it's necessary that we have a different approach, and it has no less severe consequences than if you're, beating your kids and not feeding them.
Right.
But it's a completely different paradigm.
Totally different.
For
paradigm.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder, when you went through this transition with your daughter, especially after you've healed the relationship, how did that affect other relationships in your life?
I talk a lot about this with other parents who are estranged, that it's sort of, you feel like, God, if I can lose my own child, life is much more fragile than I imagined it would be. It's kind of the people who've been through, who've been raped or violently attacked or robbed at gunpoint or been through a war, and your brain sort of changes. You realize that life is much more fragile and delicate, and the things that you sort of take on as just sort of you assume are always going to be there can be taken away from you. So I think it just made me more cautious in a certain way, not so cautious that I can't live my life, but more likely to act if something is going to act on something, if I feel like it's starting to slip away or going down the wrong path. And, I think with my other two kids, it's made me much more conscientious if I feel like there's something up, in my relationship with either of them, or either of them have a complaint, either being the other two boys. I'm much more likely, I think, to intervene earlier on than I might have been otherwise. I might have been like, oh, whatever, they're just being jerks, or, it'll work itself out. I don't need to deal with this. But now it's kind of like, oh no, I better get on this, All
right. So if you have a sense now that something's wrong, even if it's small, you follow some action on that sense. You take action on it before it becomes something major. Whereas before you would sort of justify, hey, I don't, it's not that big a deal. It's not important. I'm busy, whatever the case is. If it becomes something major, then I'll deal with it.
Right. Exactly.
And other relationships outside of your kids, have you had the same effect with your wife or with friendships or other relationships? Have you seen similar effects as well?
Yeah, no, I think in general, it's just probably made me more thoughtful about how things can end. That life is fragile, and if it can happen with your child, it could certainly happen with a friend or a marriage or any other extended relationship, and not to take things for granted.
Yeah. No, I think that's a huge one. I had there's reminders all the time, but I had a fraternity brother my age die of aneurysm last week.
Last week. Oh wow, how sad.
And yeah, it's very sad, and it's a reminder to not take any day for granted, because he was not, horribly unfit or anything like that. Right. He was living his life. Right.
Yeah,
and then died.
Right. Exactly.
And so that's true with relationships too. We think there'll always be another day to work it out, but that day can turn into years very quickly. And if something happens to one of us in the meantime,
that's it. That's it.
Right.
Exactly. Opportunity lost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Where do you think your life would be if you hadn't had this estrangement? Like, if a different path, if you hadn't made this transition, where do you think your life would be today?
Well, I don't think I'd be specializing in what I've specialized in, which is helping parents and adult children reconcile, which has been deeply meaningful. I don't know that I would have had a mission per se. My first book was about how to help people who were married with children but weren't very happy in their marriage still stay together because they wanted to preserve the family. So that my second book was, about helping parents navigate navigating parenting and housework together. It was more written about men, but it was for both men and women. It was called The Lazy Husband, frankly.
Yeah, that's a catchy title to get you on all the talk shows. That's well done.
Right. Kind of what endeared me to men everywhere. So my guess is I would have probably continued on that path, sort of thinking about couples and things that are kind of in that space. But yeah, I think that can't imagine I would have gone into this area of specialization, and it's been just meaningful to kind of really see how many people are suffering in this way and how many can be helped. And not everybody can, frankly, but a lot can. And to sort of have a mission. I certainly don't think I had a mission in life before then, but I absolutely do now. And that's to kind of help families navigate this very rocky terrain that so often so many are faced with.
Yeah, no, and I think that's beautiful. I mean, I do a lot of work with folks in midlife transition, right? And having a mission, having a purpose, is so important and so life-giving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So that's quite a gift, even if it was a very difficult road to get there.
Right.
It's quite a gift. And if I flip that around, if I turn that coin around for our listeners, whatever difficulty thing you're going through right now, has the potential to be that gift.
It's true.
Right. So that it's not wasted. So it's not just suffering. It's suffering that can help others to suffer a lot less or to reconcile and still have a really great experience on the backside of it and not just live in that suffering.
Right. It makes you more empathic to other people who are going through something similar, maybe just more empathic in general, because you kind of know what it feels like. And that's kind of what is the root of empathy, knowing what something feels like to somebody else because you felt it yourself. And that is a very meaningful experience. So I agree with you about that. Yeah.
No, that's a big one. If you were to talk directly to first parents, but then also children that are estranged right now, what's one piece? If we start with parents, if I'm an estranged parent right now and you're talking to me, what's one tool, the first thing that you would say that I can do, that anybody can do right now to take a step toward, and I'm talking to parents that don't want to be estranged, which I imagine is most of them. There may be a few that are.
Probably all of them, but yeah.
Somebody that wants to reconcile with their kids, what's the one tool, the first step that anybody can take that you would recommend for them to do?
Well, the main thing, which is sometimes the hardest for parents, is to write what I call a letter of amends, where they find the kernel, if not the bushel, of truth in their children's complaints about them. But to start up by saying something like, I know you wouldn't do this unless you felt like it was the healthiest thing for you to do. Now, from the parent's perspective, it doesn't feel like the healthiest thing for them to do. It feels like an incredibly hurtful thing for them to do. And they probably don't even feel like it's the healthiest thing for the kid to do. But from the adult child, they wouldn't be doing it unless they felt like it was either the healthiest thing for them to do or the only thing that they knew kind of how to do.
Right, which is a subset of the other.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of finding a way to get on the same page with their adult child rather than, defending or explaining or criticizing or guilt tripping or trying to pressure them back into contact. Because it's sort of a way of acknowledging that this breach is there for a reason and that the parent's willing and able to take responsibility and work on it and work toward it. So many younger people say in this space, well, you need to do the work. You need to work on yourself. And parents don't always know what that means. But part of it means, working on being an easier person to communicate with or to take responsibility or to be more open to the things I'm trying to tell you. So I think it's the most essential step. And, it's probably the best first step to take as well. But to get back to the point of curiosity, to just be curious about why, tell me more about why you landed here, what it is that are there other memories that you have? Are there other things that contribute to it? How did it impact you? Is it still impacting you in what way? What can I do? If there are other things I could do or you need me to say, can we do family therapy together? But all that's kind of in the spirit of curiosity and interest in non-defensiveness. So doing that sets the right stage. Now, the adult child may not be willing or able to accept that olive branch, but the olive branch has to get extended because the adult child's already decided that it works better for them not to be in contact.
Right.
They're not going. Parents will sometimes get annoyed with me and say, "Well, no, they can make amends to me. They can reach out to me." I'm like, "Yeah, but
them first."
Right, but except that they're not, and they're not going to. So maybe they will eventually. I don't know. But if you want to speed this up or see if there's any possibility of reconciliation, you're going to have to show some leadership here.
So you called it letter of amends, but you actually talked about just being curious and trying to have empathy in everything you've written so far. You didn't. I was listening. There's not any like, I'm sorry I did X. It was just, I understand you think this must be what's best for you. What's going on? Like to be really curious and not defensive. So that's the starting point.
Yeah, but within the same letter, I would also say if you know what the child's complaints are, and that's where finding the kernel, if not the bushel of truth, is so important to say. It is true that whatever, I was preoccupied when you were growing up, or I did have an anger issue. I could see how that could have been hurtful to you, or I did. Your mom and I did split up, and I could see how that was really difficult for you, and you did have to manage things in a different way, or I didn't protect you from your stepfather, or there's so many things.
Right.
Now, if the parent doesn't know, and sometimes they don't, they should say something like, "But it's clear I have significant blind spots as a parent or a person that I don't understand why you need to do this, but I want to learn."
Which is clearly true. If you are completely estranged and you don't have any idea why, there's blind spots, right?
Right, exactly.
So there is an amends part to it as well. It's empathy and curiosity, but also saying, I recognize this if you know what it is, and if not, it's even I recognize I have really big blind spots because I don't even know what it is.
Exactly. But I want to know. And if you're comfortable telling me, I promise to read it or listen purely to listen and understand and not to defend myself. Because that's often the reason the adult child stops complaining or telling the parent what their issues are, because they feel like the parent either gets defensive or is too defensive, or it's not going to go well, or they just don't want to hurt the parent's feelings. Obviously nothing's going to hurt the parent's feelings more than being estranged, but some people, if they're really conflict avoidant, may just never go there for that reason.
Right.
But that sort of begs the question for the adult child. What a lot of adult children don't approach the parent in a way that really gets the right response. If you go to your parent and say, "Well, I'm learning in therapy that you have a narcissistic personality disorder," or
and you effed me up in these 12 ways, and it's all your fault.
Right, exactly. If your goal is a better relationship, that's not going to get you there.
Right. If you lead with a bat across the forehead, it's going to be hard to have that conversation.
Hard, right? So
what would you recommend? So that's for the parents, is to write this empathy and amends letter, to at least be open and key to not be defensive, right? To not have any justification, coming back to the anatomy of peace. No justification coming in there at all. Just to be open and willing.
Yep.
This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Transition Mastery Coaching. If you have made it to midlife and you're successful and you are going through transitions in your life, in your business, in your career, or in your organization, and you are looking to master those transitions, to make the most of them, to accelerate into the next phase of your organization or your life. If you're facing challenges in your business, challenges in your relationship, challenges in your health, and you really want to transition those quickly, I'm here to guide you for that. And I look forward to working with you. And you can sign up for either Pinnacle Transition Coaching or Summit. Please go to lifeinTransition.online/MLTM and scroll to see the Summit and Pinnacle Coaching, or reach out to me directly on my email, art@artblanchford.com. And I look forward to connecting with you and helping you to accelerate your transitions to achieve what it is that you want to achieve in the second half in your organization and in your life, so you can live your whole life with no regrets. And then for the estranged adult child, if I want to make amends, if I want to build a relationship again with my parents, what's the first step that you recommend for that?
Yeah, I think it's to let them know that in communicating what you're about to communicate, the goal is to have a better relationship, not to tear the parent down. As I said, it's very hard for any parent to hear what their adult children's complaints are and to not get defensive or hurt or feel wounded or unappreciated. So to kind of prepare the ground for that and say that, I want to have a closer relationship with you or a better relationship with you, to try to find something that was good about the parent or the relationship, to kind of let them know that the goal isn't just to make them feel bad. Say you were very dedicated, or I had a better quality of life because you were so much, you worked so hard or whatever. But there were things that happened either in the past or presently that are making it really hard to either be close to you or spend time with you. And I would like to give you some feedback about that. Are you open to it? A parent may say no. In that case, the adult child could say, well, that's going to make it harder for me to spend time with you because there are things you're doing that are really difficult for me and have done in the past. So I'm open to doing family therapy, or if you want to do individual therapy, here's what I'd like you to work on. I think most parents would probably just out of curiosity say, sure, tell me. But then to do it in a way that talks about behaviors, not labels, to say
Right.
these were the things that were hurtful. You were really critical, or you had your anger was much more hurtful to me than you realized, or your drinking problems, or you're out of control in certain ways, or whatever it is, rather than you're a narcissist, you're a borderline, you're a sociopath, you're a gaslighter.
Yeah, no, that to start with the I statements, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. The classic. When I saw this behavior, I felt this.
Exactly.
Right. And then there's nothing to be defensive about because you can't argue with somebody about their experience.
Exactly. That's right.
Right.
Yep.
No, that's that's really good. One thing I want to add from my own experience in there, I'm coming from the child's perspective, the adult child's perspective, is it's good to be clear about what type of relationship that you want to have with your parents, because it's I'm not going to say easy, but it's easier. It's easy in quotes to have a good fake relationship.
True. Yep.
But that's also not I'll speak for myself. That's not what I want anymore.
Yeah, sure.
If I'm going to have a relationship, I want it to be built on something other than just me checking the boxes, similar to the way I was with my kids, where I sort of check the boxes of, in my life, I want to have this type of relationship with my parents. So I'm going to do these actions so I can check the box that I have a good life because my parents are part of my life.
Right. Sure.
And so that's I feel better about my relationship with my parents today, even though it's less engaged than it was some years ago. It's still engaged, but it's less engaged because it's more authentic.
Yeah, sure.
And it's not me, putting, this is not the case, but putting lipstick on a pig.
Right.
Right.
But I think there's, I agree with what you're saying, but I think there's a case to be made for even a sort of a fake good relationship if it means, that your parents can become grandparents and your kids can have time with their grandparents. And sometimes that's the best that can be made. And I think that too many people these days go, well, I'm not going to have a fake relationship with my parents. I'm not going to have any relationship, and neither are my kids. And I just don't know that that's the better option.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I'll give you that. And while my kids were growing up, I did have this. This fake is maybe too strong, but it was a one-sided because I was putting in the effort.
Right. Sure.
Relationship, and I do think that had value. It brought me to a place where we could have curious conversations.
Oh, good.
Right. But now where I'm at in my life is I want to have a real relationship, and that's important to me. Right. Sure, and to get to a place, and this maybe sounds really harsh, but I don't need my parents to be a piece of the puzzle in my life in a way for me to be okay.
Right. Sure.
Right. I would like them to be,
right.
But if they're not, it's not like I'm not enough or less of a person because I don't have the right picture with my parents in the right place on that picture.
No, I think that's important. I had somebody say to me recently who had reconciled with his parents, and he said something like, if you keep insisting that your parents have to change, maybe you're the one that has to change. So sometimes it's
the only thing we can control in the end is ourselves. Right? We can invite others. Yeah. But we have to do our own work.
Exactly.
Right. That's, again, I'm old, but I'm still young enough to know that term, and I've done a lot of my own work, and it's really true. So for the parents is to write this letter of amends, right? It's with empathy and amends, and for the kids to begin the conversation with curiosity, with I statements, not with accusatory, not with labels of identity.
Right.
You are this, you are that. But
Right.
when you did this, I experienced this.
Exactly.
As a starting point. And then also for the kids, you said also to talk about how they would want it to be. I'm here because I would like to have a better relationship with you.
Right. And it maybe start out, it's the compliment sandwich. You start out with what you like, love, admire, appreciate about the parent, just to set the right tone, and then end with that as well. So all that
right.
critically.
Yeah, that's good in any communication. That's good.
Right.
No, that's really, really good advice, and I really appreciate it.
Good, thank you.
A final question for you. This is something that's very, as you can tell, it's very near and dear to my heart, and I think will be to a lot of our listeners going through life transition.
Sure.
Where can people find out more about you? Where's the best place to connect with you, Josh?
Yeah, probably my website, www.drjoshuacoleman.com. I also have a Substack now. It's called Family Troubles, where I post, weekly articles and starting to do interviews as well. So those are probably the two best places to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for being open to share your vulnerability, not just on this podcast, but with everybody, to help other people not have to suffer unnecessarily for the rest of their lives, really. And I really appreciate that you're on this mission to help reduce this estrangement between parents and their adult children, which is not the way we're meant to be. Right. And even though a lot of people are that way right now, and help both sides to come across that. I really appreciate your vulnerability and how you showed up in our conversation today.
Oh, thank you. It was good to meet you, and thank you for what you're doing as well.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.